discuss about reforming the United Nations Security Council. This is an quite old, but actually getting more relevant given the today situations. So in this panel, we are going to discuss how the global security issues has been anchored by the dynamics that is going on within the framework of United Security Council, especially related to the question how the decision should be made, should be improved in the future, and this is also related to the question how UN, especially UN Security Council, should be reformed to accommodate the current challenges and the future of the global security matters. This session also discuss how Indonesia and Germany might share the same concern related to the issues, and if there's any variation, we can also find out by listening to our distinguished panel today. The first speaker would be Ibu Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. She is a research professor at the Indonesian Institute of Sciences, or as known in Indonesia, LIPI. And the second speakers would be Bapak Ambassador Makarim Wibisono. He is currently the senior fellow of KAS-CSIS, and he was also ambassador of the Republic Indonesia to the United Nations from 2004 until 2007. And our last speaker is Lieutenant General Dr. Klaus Olhausen. He is a former military representative in the military committees of NATO and European Union, and he was also the former president of Clausewitz Society, Germany. Without further ado, I think we can move to the first distinguished speaker today, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. The time will be yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank both the organizers, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and KAS-CSIS, for inviting me to join this very important dialogue, and I've really enjoyed all the panel discussions. And secondly, given the fact that a former Indonesian permanent representative in the UN is sitting next to me, I asked Philip, I said, I'm redundant, why do you need me? Because all of the information I've got is clearly from, what I've read your speeches at the UN, and also what the foreign ministries have laid out there. So, I'm here, so I would just like maybe to preempt you from what you're going to say, because most of my points here are actually, quoted from a lot of speeches made by the Indonesian reps in the UN. So next, please. Yeah. Our topic is very specific. It's about how to reform the UN Security Council, and is there any area for cooperation between Indonesia and Germany which could push this forward. Just a number of pointers, facts. Of course, most of you are already experts, but for some of them, I understand that there are also some students out there. We just need to reiterate again the fact that of course, the Security Council is a very special body within the United Nations. It is the institution within the UN that bears the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, and that it has the power to make decisions that member states are obligated to implement. So this is I think that's very, very important for us to remember that. It comprises 15 members. 5 are permanent members with veto powers, the so-called P5, namely China, France, Russia, the UK, and the USA. And there are 10 non-permanent members without veto powers and serving a 2-year term, representing different regions. There are 3 for Africa, 2 for Asia, 2 for Latin America, 2 for Western Europe and others, and 1 for Eastern Europe. Now, I think others, Australia and New Zealand, are they included in the others? Or are they? Yes, exactly. So they're not part of Asia. So they might want to apply for part of Asia if we increase the membership for the region. Next, please. Now, of course, because of these compositions of the UN Security Council, which was the outcome of the post-Second World War, so all those 5 permanent members are in fact the victors of the Second World War, basically. There have been a lot of criticisms. The UNSC is a very powerful and very privileged body, and it does confer a very special status to the permanent 5 members. Among the status, it's not just a veto. Only these 5 countries are legitimately allowed to have nuclear weapons. All the others are bound by NPTs. But these P5 countries, they are allowed to have nuclear weapons. So that is only some of the privileges. But of course, an issue here is this questions of veto powers. There have been increasing criticisms in the past 2 decades, especially in relations to the emergence of new economic and political powerhouses in Asia, particularly in Asia, but also in Latin America and also in Africa. And also the fact that the Security Council, which is primarily responsible for ensuring international peace and security, is regarded as being less effective given the proliferation of conflicts around the globe, which the Council has failed to address. So the Council has increasingly been criticized for being unrepresentative, not reflecting the current geopolitical realities, and only run by a few of the P5 states, and that they wield their vetoes not really in the view of ensuring wider international peace and security, but rather driven by their respective national agenda. These are some of the criticisms that have been leveled at the Security Council. Next. And there have also been some direct questions that have been raised in recent years. Why are the UK and France still members of the P5 while other more deserving countries are not? Some of the more deserving countries, like Germany, Japan, India, Brazil, for example, and some other countries. And they say, and these countries are not there yet. The UK was great in the 19th century, and also France, but maybe they're not as deserving anymore. I mean, there are maybe in the first 10 years after the World War II, they have a right to be there. So some of these questions, and also that increasing criticisms of this, that the Council is becoming much more dysfunctional because of the use of veto. Although it has declined since the end of the Cold War, but the use of the veto has made it unable to act decisively and speedily in the face of major security crises, such as in Syria, for example. It's not been able to do much about it. So many countries have openly talked about the need to abolish the veto power. There have also been criticisms about the lack of transparency in the decision-making process but I'm sure Pak Makarim will tell us in details, about how, it's more like a cabal. It's a lot of the decisions-making are made in secret. And also, because of this, they are not terribly accountable to the wider international constituency. So the UNSC is seen increasingly to be lacking in legitimacy. It is neither democratic, nor transparent, or accountable to the larger international constituency. And I read your speech to the GA in 1999, where you said, that the developing countries in particular are being disenfranchised, because if you look at the compositions, China was considered to be representative of developing countries, but there's nobody from Africa, there's no country from Latin America, and the whole, the developing countries are voiceless within the Council. Next. So there have been efforts, proposals, particularly with the end, after the end of the Cold War. There have been a lot of discussions since the 1990s about the need to reform the Security Council, but so far not much headway have been made. The UN World Summit in 2005 focused on the needs to reform the Security Council as, as a central arena for UN reform to make it much more representative and democratic. And we see here that there are 5 key issues for the Security Council reform, namely categories of membership. They all agree if you want to make it more democratic, it means that you need to enlarge the membership to make it much more representative. But the issues will be, what will be the categories for membership? The question of veto, whether it should be abolished, whether it should be regulated, in what issues can vetoes be used, and in what issues that vetoes should not be used. The question of regional representations, how many from each region, for example. Also the issues of the size of the enlarged Security Council and its working method, as well as to make it much more accountable and transparent, relating to the relations between the Security Council and the General Assembly. Next. But everybody agrees on the need for reform. Everybody, now they have come to a consensus on these 5 issue areas, but there are a lot of complexities, and there's, of course, lack of disagreement about how to reform it. For example, 4 countries, the G4, India, Japan, Germany, and Brazil, have already formed a grouping to support each other's bids for permanent membership. But of course, that leads to a reaction from their respective regional rivals who have also formed their own grouping. Now it's called Uniting for Consensus, which include Pakistan, China, South Korea, Italy, and Argentina. Pakistan, of course, opposed to India. China and South Korea is not too supportive of Japan. Italy is not too keen to have Germany as a permanent member. And of course, Argentina doesn't want Brazil to be there. So these are some of the issues. And recently, in last year, this is the P5 face down S5. It's actually, that's the title of an article in Jakarta Post. So P5 face down S5. So 5 smaller countries, Singapore, Costa Rica, Jordan, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland, the so-called S5, made an argument in 2017 that the P5 members should refrain from using their veto when it relates to cases of mass atrocities. But they were forced to withdraw this proposal because if it was submitted, there was a concern that it might actually be vetoed. Next. So outlining the general issue. So how has Indonesia responded, and what, how has Indonesia put its positions there? Firstly, Indonesian leaders, from the presidents, vice president, foreign ministers, and all other leaders, have periodically called for comprehensive reform of the UNSC to make it much more democratic, transparent, accountable, effective, and that's more central to international peace and security. The last one was when President Joko Widodo made that important speech. I think it was it last year, in the event of this Asian African Conference, but also an extraordinary conference of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Again, made the point about the need to reform the UN, to make it much more central, to make it much more relevant in ensuring peace and security. It also wants to have a more equitable representation in the region, and also reflects the world's diversity and plurality. That's also one of the issues that you made, and gives more voice to the developing world. The diversity, if you look at the compositions, it's mostly 4 of the 5 permanent countries are all white from Christian traditions. China is, of course, the one in Asia and from more Confucian tradition, but the Islamic world is not there. And there's also diversities of other civilizations that's not being represented. So I think there have been some expressions from Indonesia about greater representations of diversity as well. Also, I think some mentions about the need to have longer term for non-permanent members, because 2 years is considered to be too brief to get anything done. So maybe we can have it for 4 years or 2, you can be re-elected after a 2-year term. And rather than focusing on who should be privileged to gain permanent membership, besides the P5, Indonesia has also said, focus more on the objective criteria for membership. Next, yeah. And there is also from the proposals made by Indonesia that there should be, a review mechanism on membership and how it functions to adapt to new changes over time, because the fortunes of countries come and go. You may be great today, you may be representative today, maybe in 50 years' time, you have slipped down. And you may be small and weak today, but maybe, in 20, 30 years' time, you should be able to make the grade. So there should be, it should not be permanent place, but it should be a review mechanism. And I quote here the speech made by Indonesia's representative to the UN General Assembly in last November. First, of course, he criticized that the UNSC has failed to uphold international humanitarian law. Sorry for the misspelling. And he urged, particularly, like here, Syria is very much top of the mind. And he's argued for a comprehensive reform of UNSC to make it more effective, accountable, democratic, and equitably representative. Next. And also supports abolishing veto rights, but also welcomes steps that will regulate veto use, in particular here, refraining from issuing veto in situations of massive crimes against humanity. And here he also called for enlargement of the non-permanent council seats, at least he said, 4 additional seats for Asia and Africa, as well as more seats for America and the Caribbean. And more specific one about better communication and coordination, particularly between the Security Council and hosting peacekeeping operations. Now, Germany and Indonesia are both members of the Security Council for until 2020. Is there any areas where we can cooperate? So maybe there'll be some, efforts to promote progress. We cannot be too optimistic given the fact that for 20 years, not much traction has been made, but it doesn't mean that, we have to be so pessimistic and stop about it. If we look at it, there were more discussions, public discussions, during the 1990s and early 2000s than now. I think Germany and Indonesia might again elevate the discussions to make it into a wider public discourse as well. On issues that maybe the consensus will be slightly easier, not very easy, but will be easier than or who should be members in terms of naming countries. But in areas of increasing transparency and accountability in decision making, maybe there'll be some efforts should be made there. Also outlining the objective criteria for increased memberships. Maybe if we can have more promote discussions, including track 2 discussions here, ask think tanks to be involved. What exactly should be the objective criteria for increased memberships, and maybe also discuss what would be the optimum size, where you need to strike a right balance between greater representativeness, but at the same time effectiveness in decision making. Because if it's too unwieldy, then it's not going to be terribly effective. And finally, we can also discuss about regulating the veto. I'm sure it will be vetoed also when you talk about it. But if you put it up there, the issues should be picked up, by civil societies. So it would create public pressure from outside for UN reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Dewi. There are some interesting points, especially to the last point related to how Indonesia and Germany can work together. And for example, issues that is easier, such as transparency, accountability, regulating veto, and so on and so forth. And with that, I think we can move to the second speaker, Pak Makarim, to discuss and maybe share your view to us about your experience working with the UN. Thank you.
Thank you. I associated myself with Ibu Dewi to appreciate the organizer for organizing this very important topic, on the reforming the UN Security Council. Next. Yeah. Secondly, for Indonesia, United Nations is very important. Why? Because the birth of United Nations is in the similar year with the birth of Republic of Indonesia. And then if we see the preamble of the United Nations Charter. Yeah, this actually attract the new country, in the 1945. May I repeat it? Yeah, that we, the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generation from the scourge of war. Country who just liberalized themselves from the Dutch. To see this, we are actually love to the United Nations. Reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standard of life and larger freedom. So therefore, in the early years of Indonesian independence, we were engaged in the third country committee, the Committee of Tiga Negara, for arranging our complete independence with the Netherlands. When we are also having problem with the Irian Barat, the integration of the Irian Barat to Indonesia, we are also engaged the United Nations to resolve all detail of the integration of Irian Barat to Indonesia. And then finally, when we have problem with the East Timor, we are also engaged the United Nations with the issues. So the important arm of the United Nations is the Security Council. Now Germany and Indonesia are the non-permanent or elected member of the Security Council. Next. If we see, the mandate of the Security Council is, in order to ensure prompt and effective action by the United Nations, its member states confer on the Security Council primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and agree that in carrying out its duty under this responsibility, the Security Council acts on their behalf. It means that the action taken by the Security Council on behalf of all members of the United Nations. This is the Article 24 of the United Charter. Next. So in order to make Security Council able to do their mandate, in the Charter of the United Nations, 1/3 of the content of the Charter dedicated to Security Council. And then there is also understanding that all Security Council resolution is legally binding, not like General Assembly resolution or ECOSOC resolution, which is not legally binding, but Security Council resolution is legally binding. The third one is that the Security Council is equipped, among others, with Military Staff Committee, Sanction Committee, the Commission on Conventional Armament, Peacekeeping Troops, to enable the Security Council to make and keep peace in conflicting area. If you see the Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 are designed to provide as legal basis for United Nations peacekeeping forces under the control of the Security Council. There is also a troop contributing countries forum to discuss the deployment of troops contributed by the UN member state. Indonesia also sent troops to Lebanon and other countries. Next. However, now we see that there are so many unresolved conflicts which are actually incompatible with the message of the Charter of the United Nations. For example, Ibu Dewi already mentioned about Syrian war that has killed more than 500,000 victims. Palestinian and Israeli war that has killed more than 1 million people. War in Yemen, war in Afghanistan, conflict in Iraq, Rohingya suffering in Myanmar. They are all still pending. And then Security Council do nothing in order to address this issue. Next. So I underline the point that has been raised by Ibu Dewi. There are many comments of international society. For example, the Security Council is not responsive to international conflict. Is the Security Council still relevant to the current international relation? There is big, headline in one of newspaper in the United States. Also, the Security Council has no capacity to take action on the ground. They just make resolution, but it's not implementable. Yeah? There is also no early warning mechanism that enables Security Council effectively preempt any conflict that may be widening. I still remember when we have got information in 1995 that in Burundi there were already 2,000 killed, yeah, because the conflict of Hutu and Tutsi. We get mad. At this time, Germany and Indonesia were also members of Security Council. All members of Security Council got mad at the Secretariat of the United Nations. Why they didn't have such kind of like early warning system to the Security Council? Yeah, in order for member of Security Council to preempt this kind of the endangering situation in the field. Yeah. There is also a question, does Security Council capable to carry out its mandate to maintain international peace and security? So there is a question. If there is any new conflict, people not asking to Security Council, but they are asking to a major power that are able to help them. Should we seek for alternative mechanism to replace the Security Council? Yes, there are many meetings discussing about the possibility of G20 to replace the United Nations Security Council, or also try to integrate Security Council into General Assembly in order to make it more democratic and decision-making process. Next, Mr. Javier Perez de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the United Nations in 1986, provide the answer to this problem. Yeah, he mentioned, there is a lack of unanimity among government, especially among the permanent members of the Security Council, and a lack of respect for and failure to cooperate with its own decision. Yeah, it's not decision of other body of the United Nations, but Security Council decision. Yeah, so this is the answer of Perez de Cuellar. His views is already stated by Professor Kirk, next, several years earlier. Professor Grayson Kirk mentioned that the credibility of Security Council depends on the cohesiveness of the permanent members. Yeah? The success of the Security Council in maintaining international peace and security is determined by the solidarity of the permanent members. If this solidarity fails, then the security enforcement arrangement will surely fail. So there is no cohesiveness at all, particularly at this moment, in the Security Council permanent membership. Next, view of leaders. You know, in General Assembly meeting, usually leaders come and make a statement. Manmohan Singh of India, I still remember I was there. You know, he mentioned in the 23rd November 2004, highlighted that I quote, democratic deficit impeded the effectiveness of the work of multilateralism. The multilateralism will work effectively through democratic consensus building. And then he revered that there is no democratic decision-making in Security Council because all decided by the permanent members. President Dmitry Medvedev of Russia in the UN in 2009 stressed, I quote, that the United Nations shall take into account the real geopolitical shift in the current world politics, as well as the geo-economic shift in the current world politics. If you see the economy of France compared to the economy of Germany, it is like, a very contrast. Germany is leading in European market, but the reality, France is the member a permanent member of Security Council. So it is incompatible with the geo-economic as well as geopolitical in the current world politics as well as the world economy. Next. Germany and Indonesia can work together, yeah, to revitalize the working group. Yeah, the working group has to focus on key issues. One, as mentioned by Ibu Dewi, is on veto right. I will, talk a little bit on veto right. Yeah. After that, on the regional representation. Yeah, I will talk about the expansion of the membership of the Security Council because it is not a new thing. Yeah, it has been discussed. Yeah, earlier. Yeah, and then Germany, Japan also were mentioned to be the candidate. Yeah, and the improvement of the Security Council working methods. Yeah. Next. So people ask why the United Nations gives such kind like a prerogative to the permanent members. Yeah. This actually had been seriously discussed in February 1945 in Yalta Conference. Because during the Yalta Conference, they discussed about the disruption of the League of Nations. You know, because as a matter of fact, no major power be part of League of Nations. So therefore, there is no major power that ensure that enforcement by League of Nations is respected by other members of international society. So in order to engage the major power, so this veto right, is actually created. There are 3 countries introduced the idea of a veto right is US, supported by United Kingdom, and Republic of China. At that period of time, the permanent member was Taiwan, not Beijing. So the 3, introduced this idea of the veto power. And then this veto power, such kind like a situation or a position of 4 countries, France later on joined, that this is the position of the major power. If you want the major power join the United Nations, we will have to be reflected in this veto power. Otherwise, forget about. So this is better, yes, take it or leave it. So this is so this formulation of the Article 27 of the United Charter mentioned about the veto right because this is the request, of this for major power, that reflected on Declaration of Yalta, at that period of time. But the problem is, any changes of the United Nations chapter has to be supported by 2/3 of the UN members, as well as permanent member of the Security Council. So to get support of 2/3 of UN member as well as the permanent member of the Security Council is not easy. So, for example, in 1945 as well as 1946, there was an idea to qualify the utilization of the veto right. For example, that they are suggesting that veto right can be utilized fully by the permanent member, on the non-procedural matters, on substantive matters. But on procedural matters, let the members get initiative to introduce something in order to resolve the conflict that happened. However, the initiative taken by non-permanent members at that period of time was rejected by the major powers. However, now is 2019. More than 50 years, half century. Maybe this is the opportunity time for Germany and Indonesia, work hand in hand to revitalize discussion on these issues. Yeah, because Germany is there as a candidate. Don't be surprised also that maybe Indonesia will be also the candidate for the permanent member. Next. So the problem there is about the regional representation. If you observe meticulously on the members of the permanent members, there is no representation at all of the developing countries in the permanent of the Security Council. No one. All are representing the developed countries. United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. Countries with strong economy, such as Germany, Japan, India, Brazil, are not in the permanent members of the Security Council. So it is incompatible with the suggestion made by President Medvedev in 2005. It should be reflected the current geopolitical and geoeconomic setting. So therefore, is there any representation of Islamic civilization in the membership of the permanent member? There is no at all. While the conflict is in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Palestine, they are all actually in Islamic country, but there is no representation of Islamic civilization there. So, there are other arguments that if you discuss about the UN credibility, there is a argument that there is no credibility without legitimacy. So, what is the prerequisite of legitimacy? So there is no legitimacy without representation, like what happened with the history of taxation in Europe several centuries ago. There is no taxation without representation. So it is also, there is no legitimacy without representation. Next. 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 It's time to drink. No, back, lagi atas. Sesudah ini, next, So, why we should address this problem of the Security Council reform? Because why? The lack of the representation. If you see, in 1945, according to the Charter, the member of Security Council is 11, while the country in the world is only 51. One is Poland as the last country. So if you see the percentage between Security Council members and the General Assembly members, it is about 21.7%. Almost 1/4 of the General Assembly members. If you see on the 1963, there is such kind of recognition of the international community to try to adjust the member of Security Council. Because why? Because there are so many new countries as a consequence of the decolonization policy of the United Nations. So in 1963, the General Assembly members 100 countries, and then there was agreement to expand the member of Security Council into 15. So if you see, the percentage in 1963 is 15%. So there is a decreasing trend. So in 2019, the member of Security Council is 15, while the GA members is 194 because of Sudan, South Sudan, yeah. So the percentage is around 7.8%. So the percentage is becoming declining and declining, yeah. So it indicates that the representation of Security Council toward all of the member states should be adjusted accordingly, yeah. So therefore, next, Kofi Annan, yeah, in 2005, make a report. The title of the report is "Enlarger Freedom." Yeah, he proposed the expansion of the UN Security Council from 15 to 24 members. If you see 24 divided by 194 times 100% is around, you know, like 18% or 19%. It's better, yeah, it's better. So he actually want that this process should be completed, because this has been researched, this has been a lot of thinking, this had been a lot of discussion. So he mentioned like this: these important issues has been discussed for too long. I believe member states should agree to take a decision on it, preferably by consensus. But in any case, before the summit, making use of one or other the option presented in the report of the high-level panel. Eventually, there is no decision up to now. Yeah. Next, the opportunity. Now, Germany and Indonesia are provided opportunity to work together as non-permanent member of the Security Council for 2019-2020. The German delegation can mobilize country from the developed world to try to engage themselves on the discussion, while Indonesia can mobilize the developing countries to try to also give attention on these issues. Because if we see the problem now is actually getting more serious because of the rivalry between United States and China, yeah, because of the issues of conflict in South China Sea, yeah, and other things. So we do need such kind like a body or international body that can manage and also avoid the conflict erupted. Yeah. So we do hope that Security Council will perform, yeah, primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Yeah. I don't think that we can, you know, miss this opportunity, because once we miss this opportunity, we have to wait, you know, several years to be a new member again of the non-permanent members of the Security Council. Next. So thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Makarim Wibisono, for your wonderful insights. And the last speaker is Lieutenant General Dr. Klaus Olhausen. For Dr. Klaus, time is yours.
Thank you very much. Fortunately, I'm in the position that everything has been said, but not by everybody. So let me concentrate on the realities. We have listened to where we came from, what the requests are. And the important point was when you mentioned the 2/3 and the 5 permanent members. So, and looking the period of 25 years, when you want to go forward, where do you start? I would really recommend, don't start with questioning the veto of the 5 permanent members. You will never get their agreement to that by any resolution. So you had another point there, which I think might be worthwhile, and one of the reasons because this Switzerland and Liechtenstein thing did not go through, because they mentioned also the veto stuff. They didn't refer to changing the composition for good reasons, but they made this limiting of veto, so to speak, voluntarily in certain cases. And this was bad enough for the 5, and the reason why it was not taken from the assembly or even not to the assembly for voting was that since it was basically going for procedural matters and not for the composition, and the P5 made it a 2/3 issue, which normally is not for procedures. They said if we have this voted upon, they will come back and say now in the future even procedural things will be 2/3 majority. So that's why they actually withdrew that. So where does that leave us? The German government, who was very strong on the G4 and still wrote an article on the website of the Foreign Office in August last year, that yes, as long as this is not done, the legitimacy of the UN Security Council is kind of in danger or limited. When you look at the program for the 2 years on the 1st of January, you don't find that. So there's a split in things of what to concentrate on. So they have the woman in peace and security, they have human rights, they have disarmament, all big issues. So now, for me, it tells, let's take the important issues before the composition or the representation. So maybe to terms of transparency, accountability, we might be able to make progress in terms of reform, but leave at least the P5 discussion to kind of change their position away. I even might assume that the P5 might be even ready to increase the number of elected members. I like that wording this morning, that we are not talking about non-permanent members, but of elected members. So I will keep that in my mind. And to have them. But even in this scenario, the General Assembly could not get a 2/3 majority because some were for more permanent members plus non or elected members, and others were for only elected members in the terms of coming to 25. So even the General Assembly was on this issue split, that they couldn't come to a 2/3 majority. So that brings me back to the methods, the procedures. And of course there are internal procedures. The United Security Council is still working on a provisional procedures paper. They have not been able to finalize a procedural issue, which is the procedures of the United Security Council. But there are many proposals, and some of them have in individual cases worked, that the coordination, cooperation between the General Assembly and the Security Council, even in terms of where peace and security is at stake, can be improved. There was an article even earlier, I mean 1949 or so, Uniting in Peace, where even at that time, one tried to give the General Assembly in certain cases a better possibility to include or to improve or to have a bigger voice in terms of all peace and security related issues. So there could be possibilities to strengthen the coordination, cooperation between the Council and the General Assembly on those issues, still not fighting the primary or secondary position. If you start to request as the General Assembly that we are the primary, you will have to face again the article of the Charter, and it won't lead to nowhere. Now, so my basic recommendation is look for all the things that are below, asking the P5 to go away, to give the veto down and something, and concentrate on issues how to make progress. It was this morning when somebody asked or made the point of the question, what benefit do I have from the UN in general and from the UN security in particular? The return question is, how would the world look like if we didn't have the United Nations and the Security Council? So, and when you look at this question, then you see that there are certain effects that the Assembly as well as the Council can bring forward. The Council, of course, there were the wars that are continuing, but the wars are not began by the United Security Council. They began by nations who wanted to fight. And in terms of Afghanistan, we have many UN security resolutions. But the resolution as such does not help you if you don't have the will of those people on the ground really to follow those rules and still have the thinking that they will win. As long as people are in a position that their party will win, it's very hard even for the Security Council to gain the support. So there is a mixed bag between positive results from the UN Security Council and negative ones. Another positive one, for me at least, was when I think it was in the end of 2017, the Council was together on the sanctions against North Korea. For me, that was not a big surprise, but it was not certain that it would happen after all the testing of rockets and everything like this. So there are certain elements, and those big countries like China and Russia and the US, they were kind of together on this, and they kept it, at least to a very high degree. So we will never get all the things solved by the Security Council. And one thing, you made the humanitarian point. The responsibility to protect issue with the two areas where we acted on this without the Security Council resolution in Kosovo, and where we acted with the United Security Resolution in Libya, it led to the fact that you will never get another resolution on this because there is always one of those who thinks that he will be in a worse position when this is gone through or extended in what it meant. So keep the P5 as they are. Look maybe for the procedures and for the cooperation and coordination first, and then make an attempt of whether the increase of elected members, if that's the first way, before you get permanent plus members, whether you can get the 2/3 majority there, and then while you not touch the P5, you might even get a more positive response of the P5, because the P5 in other areas were ready to increase the G7-8 to G20. So there is a possibility, if they are not just taken away some of their possibilities or privileges, but add others that really for real reasons should be there, then you can make progress. That could be done by I think, our Foreign Office and your Foreign Office to talk about those things, whether from the experience of the last 20 years and all the papers we have from different configurations, what does it mean if you really want to make progress beyond the present stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Olhausen. There are some important points that have been made by speakers related to the question whether and how UN Security Council should be reformed. And our last speaker has mentioned that we can put aside the question about how and should we reform the veto power privilege for the P5, and we should move forward by considering some lower issues such as coordination, cooperation, and about how to increase the elected members of the UN Security Council. With that, I would open the first floor to the audience if you have any questions related to the matter that we are discussing right now. Yes, first, and the second, the lady with the mic. Okay. Yes.
I wanted to ask whether, because you had these figures on the representation, that in the beginning the Security Council was 27% and now it's only 7-point-something%, whether you could say that the UN Security Council was more cohesive, coherent, and effective during the time when it was more representative. I mean, this is at the height of the Cold War. And actually, the permanent 5 reflect the result of World War II. And it stayed that way. At least the P5 do not. but they didn't get along, and China kept quiet for a very long time when it finally replaced the Republic of China. So was there more effectiveness at the time, or are we looking at a very long period of ineffectiveness?
Thank you. The second question.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Andita, and I'm a student at Parahyangan Catholic University. So my question is about the proposal for veto refrain. So considering that the decisions made, those proposals will have to assume they go through voting in Security Council, would the proposal of veto refrain, if it were to be agreed, go through P5 vote with a risk of veto, or can the UN take unilateral action to make that happen? Should the UN itself take a stronger stance in order to facilitate the proposed reform of the Security Council itself? Thank you.
We have two questions. First on the relations between cohesiveness and the representativeness, and the second is on, what again? On how to initiate, sorry, the veto reform, yes. Ambassador first.
I thank for the question. Yeah, first, I underline the point that you just mentioned on the cohesiveness and the effectiveness. Yeah? As you were aware, in the 1957 and 1950, there are troops across the Yell River, go to the Korea, and then the troops go down, to most part of Korea. Yeah, at that time, the Security Council decided a resolution, utilize the 7 chapter, chapter 7, and then there is a troop sent to Korea at that period of time, and then all permanent members go along with that. So at that period of time, the representation of the Security Council actually representing, the highest rank, it's like 21%, 25% of the General Assembly. So if people represented, feeling that you are well represented in the one body, and then the body decides something, so people will go along with you. But if you create a organization, and then the member of the organization is not felt as represented the aspiration, so they will create such kind of like the problem. So now the problem is, in order to, this is the same answer to the second question. Any changes to the work of the Security Council should be also endorsed by the decision of the Security Council members. For example, the General Assembly can initiate a discussion, to change the decision-making process of the Security Council. But this should be endorsed by the Security Council members in order to be able to be a decision of the United Nations. So therefore, there is such kind of like a dilemma. Our colleague, General Claus, recommended, why don't we try to do something that not annoy, the interests of the P5, but I underline the important to try to do something, that change the status quo, We are not in favor of the current status quo, because this will bring the multilateralism weaker and weaker, and then don't be surprised that unilateralism will be stronger and stronger. Because in the absence of the multilateralism, the logical consequences will be the unilateralism. So therefore, in the absence of the work of Security Council, there will be a lot of unilateralism on the table. So now I fully support the idea is how can we start the talks? How can we engage the member of the United Nations to try to consider that these issues is important for the future of the United Nations? Yeah, so this is important. The tactic that maybe the privilege of the P5 will be discussed later on the last priority. That's fine for me. Yeah? But let's engage all of the member states, discuss about the need to adjust Security Council works according to a new challenge, yeah, that are now actually facing the Security Council. Maybe you would like to.
I think at the realist level, I agree very much with General Olhausen that we go for the low-hanging fruits. So what can be agreed upon, within the feasible future, within the shorter term. But at the idealist level, I think we need to be much more ambitious than that. We are not just talking about our current generation, but in the future. And while we can say that, what would the world be like without the UN and UN Security Council, we have seen that regimes rise and fall, and we cannot simply say that as the Security Council status quo becomes more and more delegitimized and becoming irrelevant, then we will see more chaos. So in this case, I would argue that why not return the energy of the 1990s? This all of remember, the peace dividends, the discussions about how to reform the world, the new international world order, and so on. Now we are bogged down with Trump and Xi and all of that. But I think we need to think beyond that as well. So on this Security Council veto refrain, it was only suggested last year, 2017, and after all, that was shot down immediately. But the idea is already there. The fact that the Indonesian Perm representative actually mentioned that in his speech, that makes it, and I'm sure that all other representatives are also beginning to talk about this. Why not continue to encourage this? Maybe not within the UN system proper, but maybe more discussions within the think tanks communities, within the epistemic community, and creating public pressure. General, when in Indonesia only became a functioning democracy in 1998. Before that period, if we listen to discussions about the role of the military in politics in Indonesia, we thought that it was a given forever and ever and ever that the Indonesian military would be the dominant power in Indonesian politics. That was the given wisdom then. But things happen, things change. So even in the international system, if there's enough geostrategic shifts and also pressure from outside, and leadership also matters, maybe changes in leaderships in the P5 that will be more supportive of multilateralism than the current ones. Hopefully, we need to prepare the groundwork, at least the intellectual activities in that direction. So the fourth refrain, the veto refrain in particular, for example, we allow the Rohingyas now, about 1 million of them, to be stuck, in the Bangladesh border. I was a member of the discussions on Asian Dialogue on Forced Migrations, and we say, we are talking about the need for repatriation on the one hand, but concerns about refoulement on the other, and questions mark about whether we will be able to ensure security on the ground in Myanmar, even though Bangladesh and Myanmar government say, they have bilateral agreement. But how can we be assured of that? And one reason will be that we probably need to have international, UN peacekeeping. But everybody said, oh, don't mention it because it will be vetoed by China immediately. But we need to go beyond this.
I mean, the veto power has two sides. There are certain countries who were appreciating that somebody was vetoing something. So in 2003, the veto by the French government to the resolution was in certain areas of the international community well taken. So not every veto concerns every section of the world community the same way. Therefore, since this is a mixed picture, I agree with you that this is not the most democratic way to have this body, but since you have it like this, and China and the United States and Russia are not going away easily as personalities and governments there, so I would say we do hanging it a little higher or lower or by the side, but do things that increase the credibility beyond that. And the credibility of the UN Security Council is as much dependent on what they decide and not of who is on the council. So if they would be in a position to take decisions that are accepted by the wide majority of the international community, that would help the credibility, and that would also kind of improve the possibilities of coordinating, talking between General Assembly and the Council in certain ways. So there is no clear-cut solution to the issue. I agree with you that it is on the table, and will keep on the table, and I think the veto powers know that. But they see also that their clients are still strong enough that when they have a certain point, the General Assembly will be worked around so that the two-thirds of them will not come together, even without a veto by them, which they want to avoid. And one more point on the veto. Since all members in the Council, as I understand over the years, are eager not to kind of create vetoes, they are watering down the resolutions so that everybody can agree, but that of course is in certain cases not very helpful. Sometimes you try to use a proposal in a point that you know that somebody will veto it, and to blame him with a veto. So there are both ways how this veto plays around. And since this is in itself not a one-size-fits-all picture with a 5, we should look at whom and how we approach those P5 with all the other elements of reform, that they are not sticking together, that they are not kind of having a common front, so to speak, against the proposals that come from the General Assembly.
So you want them to be less cohesive?
Thank you. We still have around 15 minutes. I think it would be enough for the second round of questions. If we have 2 more questions from the audience. Yes, first. And second. Yes. Okay. Please.
Yeah, hello, good evening. My name is Sahrudin, I'm from Banten. I just want to know what Indonesia has been contribute in as the non-permanent membership in United Nations. What Indonesia has been contribute, and what the benefit for Indonesia as a non-permanent membership in United Nations. Even I already read in news, but the information like somewhere here and there. So I just want to ask you directly about this question. Thank you.
Would you agree that one of the reasons that the Security Council reform hasn't really been pushed that much further in the last couple of years is that you have regional rivalry? I mean, is it, if you think of, if you plan to increase the number of permanent members, it was always a question, let's say the African continent, is it going to be South Africa or is it going to be Nigeria? On the Asian continent, is it India versus Indonesia, for example? Or in Latin America, Mexico versus Brazil, for example. So I think the regions have been blocking it themselves a little bit, and that was maybe one other explanation why we haven't gone further. Thank you.
Back, if you can make it quick.
Good afternoon. My name is Dennis. I'm from southern Jakarta. I just wonder, since one of you raised up about the issue that even though France is a permanent member, but Germany has a higher GDP, it is also a fact that France allocates more defense budget to its military compared to Germany. So from the way I observe it, that the permanent members have allocated more money into their military for either international security operations or peacekeeping. With that regard, do you believe that countries that seek permanent memberships should either allocate more money into international security operations, or should they contribute money to the United Nations? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I think we can go backwards from Dr. Hossein.
Let me take the last one first. Besides the representation of geographical areas, which was related by, of course, even in the present article where the non-permanent members had increased by 10, the contribution of those members was one criteria to select them. So, and that's why the Germans, without making the reform of the council the direct issue in the paper, they were making the point of where and how they are contributing, not only in the annual budget and the peacekeeping budget and the humanitarian aid and so on, and even today we have increased our troop contribution nations by Western countries to more than many other countries do. So the contribution is an important point besides the geographical representation. But from what I have read, it is clear that below the P5, the General Assembly, even within the regions, as you mentioned, were split of whom would we present together with a unanimous vote to bring forward. So there were several, let's say, impediments to really come forward with the increasing either permanent or elected membership in the council. So in terms of the money, would a new permanent member do more in terms of all contributions, which I just mentioned? I'm not sure. One could argue that's why we agreed to bring you there, but whether each country would live up to this, I don't know. You mentioned the point that history is an open development. Of course, things can dramatically change somehow, somewhen, and you might have your points already for certain situations, but you also have to look for a practical way. What kind of progress is now possible, and is it helpful to increase the situation?
Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, there are 3 questions. I start from the last one. Yeah, asking about the contribution of the candidate of the Permanent Member Security Council. As a matter of fact, you know, the United Nations has problems of funding the deployment of through peacekeeping operation in several area. Yeah, so. And then countries like Japan, Germany, they contribute significant amount, you know, for making the operation happen. Yeah, so this is the fact. Therefore, in 1997, when the issues of Security Council reform was discussed, Ambassador Madeleine Albright at that period of time suggests, yeah, that Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil to be insured there. Yeah. So therefore, this is actually based on the contribution and pledging conference organized by the United Nations. So it is easily available in the internet, the contribution of those countries. So, secondly, the problem of rivalry. Yeah? This problem of rivalry is actually can be resolved easily if we are in agreement on the number that agreeable to all for the expansion. Yeah, for example, in the corridor, there are a number that are ideal to one group and another group. For example, the Kofi Annan suggests 24. Madeleine Albright, US, suggests 22. Yeah. Another group suggests 28. Yeah. If the expansion is 28, it is not really a problem if we include for representation of the Latin America, Brazil and Mexico, because they are all having a strong economy, and then also influence in the region. And also in Africa, for example, will be no problem of country like South Africa and Egypt, for example, representing the South Africa. But if the number is shortened, for example, the expansion is 22, and then the problem is either South Africa or Egypt, or either Brazil or Mexico. That's actually the problem. Yeah, so we have to be able to, introduce a number that are actually accommodated, the concern of these candidate countries. Yeah. So about what has been contributed by Indonesian delegation and the Security Council, you follow, how can we bring the issue of Palestine, into the discussion in Security Council. These issues has been actually vetoed by United States several times, more than 100 times on the issue. But Indonesia utilizing area formula, were able to invite the ministers, foreign minister of Palestine and number of countries to discuss it in the Security Council on the issues. Yeah, this is Indonesia also was able to try to produce that adopted by the other Security Council on the procedural step, taken in order to be able to select the president of the Security Council. So there was Wisnu Murthy formula, that actually now, up to now, is being used by the Security Council. Yeah, so we have a lot of idea, but it is easily available in the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Yeah, I'm no longer with the Ministry for Foreign Affairs for more than 12 years. Yeah? So I'm not able to give you exact initiative that are adopted by the Security Council. Maybe,
Okay, on the first questions, I think we are not the right person to ask what actually has Indonesia contributed now. It's only been there for a short while. But I think that Indonesia has been a member of the Security Council a number of times. During the last membership, 2008, 2010, I think Indonesia was very active in ensuring this link between the United Nations systems and regional organizations, because that's already, that was already made by by Boutros Ghali about how the regional organizations should be at the forefront of ensuring regional peace and security, but how to link it, to the UN. And Indonesia, I think, has made that link, and that was during that time that ASEAN became a legal entity also. We've signed our ASEAN Charter, so was able also to become an observer in the UN. This time, one agenda is, of course, that's increasing this peacekeeping operations, the role of women. The discussions that was taking place this morning about how to broaden peacekeeping agenda and the role of women. That's also one of the issues. And on this counterterrorism, where not just the hard security but also the softer security. Indonesia, as the largest Muslim majority nation and also as a democracy, I think we can bring something to the table about how to address this. Because how you address these issues in countries where Muslims are mostly regarded as minorities and migrants, so outsiders, that you can deal in a particular matter. And then how you deal it in Muslim majority countries where if you do not handle this correctly, actually, it can backfire because a lot of policies in the past was regarded as being authoritarian and anti-Islamic and so on. So instead of trying to control extremists, you actually create sympathy for them in the wider public. This something like this, Indonesia can bring that, that kind of perspectives. And so these issues of deradicalization and counterterrorism, I think is quite important. How to calibrate this getting the smart approach between hard and soft, I think would be important. I think that is also one of the agenda for Indonesia. And Marie, you're right, I think this regional, the realities of regional conflicts, and there's articles here, the problems in the UN Security Council is not the veto power per se, but rather it's the politics behind it. It's not the vetoes, but it's the countries, the political will and the disagreements that they have. If they are able to agree on certain issues, then they can come together. Now, what we are concerned about is that the politics of it leads to the marginalizations of humanitarian issues. And I think we cannot consciously accept, in good conscience, accept that we understand the realities of Beijing-Washington dynamics or Washington-Russian dynamics, so they can't agree on anything on Syria and also this Iran-Saudi Arabia dynamics. But should that be allowed to stand on the way of dealing with now half of the Syrian populations are already displaced. Now, ethnic cleansing has happened in Myanmar, for example. Do we have responsibility? And this is this issue. And I think that notwithstanding this regional problems, I think that the international community does have moral responsibility, and here I think we need to go up above that, the real politics. I think idealism matters in international relations. It's not just real politics only. Should countries should contribute more money, or not just to contributing to the UN, but in particular increasing their budget for security? I think that clearly that is one of the burdens. But there are so many other criteria that we need to discuss. As countries that cannot afford these international obligations clearly should be less ambitious about it. And I think that's why Indonesia has never openly said, that we should be part of G5. Although at the back of our mind, Indonesia thinks that, we are the fourth largest country in the world, functioning democracy and the world's largest Muslim nation, and it's now G20 economy. Eventually, hopefully, we would be able to go there. So I think there is an understanding that we need to be much more modest in what we approach, because there's an understanding that there is some monetary obligations there as well.
Thank you very much, Ibu Dewi. That was a very interesting discussions. Remember back in graduate school, I was always reminded by my professor there would be some kind of balance between legitimacy and effectiveness. So I think this question has also been reflected in our today's discussion. But I think it is also important to extend this kind of discussion to the government-to-government level. So I hope that after this meeting we can continue discussing And probably if we have chance to talk to government, there would be some interesting ideas coming up from this talk about how to initiate reform and how to continue and to make the relevant again the question of reforming the UN Security Council. With that, I would like to extend my gratitude to the distinguished speakers, Professor Dewi Fortunawa, Ambassador Makarim, and Dr. Olhausen. Thank you again for you to attend the last meeting and to bear with us until the last session of this wonderful seminar. Again, thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would hand the mic to the master of the ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you to all panelists who have given us new insights on the matter. Before ending today's event, we will have closing remarks from Center for Strategic and International Studies as well as Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. So I invite Dr. Felix Fermonte as the Executive Director of CSIS to give his words. To Dr. Fermonte, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I just have short points to make. We started the discussion today on seemingly unrelated important issues. We discussed women and peace and security, climate change, and counterterrorism. As we listen to the presentation, of course, there are difficult issues, but I think all of these seemingly unrelated issues comes down to a question of how are we going to tackle these issues, bearing in mind that Indonesia and Germany are now a part of the E10, the elected 10 of the UN Security Council. These problems, for sure, cannot be solved individually by individual country or even bilaterally. Therefore, it is the right time to to go back and to restore our belief in multilateralism that has been challenged in the past few years, as we discussed since the morning. And now, one of the most important multilateral framework is the UN, of which, as we listened carefully in the last session on reforming the UN, some proposed reform has been implemented, but we learned rather painfully from the presentation and the discussion that the UN is some sort of the arena of the great power politics. And with this, we, Indonesia, as a smaller country compared to Germany, we learn very painfully from two CDDs that the weak suffer what they must. But I think we refuse to suffer because there are other multilateral mechanisms through which we can continue our effort to keep the world safe. That is, for example, regional organizations. And I think Indonesia and Germany still can share experience, Germany with the EU and Indonesia with ASEAN, and both have a lot of experience in dealing with so many international difficult issues. That is beyond UN Security Council. Indonesia and Germany are two formidable regional powers, if you like, and we are supporter of peace and international security. Tomorrow, we are going to continue this as suggested by the last session's moderator, that we need to feed into the government all the discussions that we have, proposals and recommendations. And tomorrow, I'm happy to report to the audience that are still in the room that the delegates from Germany and us from CSIS will have a discussion at the National Resilience Institute, or Lemhanas, in the hope that the discussion from the think tank will be feeding into the government thinking. And lastly, I'd like to thank you all for coming, especially the German participant who fly far from Germany and other places, including Singapore, to share some of your thoughts and wisdom and also the experience. And also I'd like to thank you, the audience, who've been participating and keep coming to CSIS on various invitations. And I do hope I'll see you again in the next event of CSIS here or other places. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the excellent remarks, Dr. Vermonte. Now we will have Mr. Jan Zenkia as the Director of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for Indonesia and Timor-Leste to give his remarks.
Actually, I have nothing to add to that what Dr. Felix Vermonte has very correctly said. Maybe I just mention that the University of Pennsylvania is annually issuing a global think tank index report, a ranking of the best think tanks in the world in different regions. And CSIS, as far as I remember, is one of the leading think tanks here in Southeast Asia. I don't know what was the ranking in Asia. What I want to say is that this excellent seminar today is a proof of the correctness of that ranking. It was a very good performance. The issues which were included in the discussions, I think, were very actual issues where both countries can agree upon the urgency and the necessity to tackle these issues on an international level and on the level of the United Nations Security Council. And there have been very interesting inputs and also interesting and productive recommendations and ideas during the discussion. So I think that we have contributed to the dialogue. As I mentioned, this is a track 2 dialogue platform. Tomorrow we will be probably track 1.5 so that we can also disseminate these ideas and recommendations towards the authorities and the government. But we had also today here some diplomats and officials in the audience, so I think that definitely this seminar is bringing some fruitful inspirations. So I would like to thank all the participants for a very active, motivated and engaged participation. This was very impressive to me. And of course the speakers for the excellent presentations, as well the moderators for their very well performance. So thank you very much, and have a nice evening today.
Thank you, Mr. Jan Zenke, for the outstanding remarks. Let us all give today's discussion a resounding round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, we have finally come to the end of our event. On behalf of CSIS, I would like to give my deepest appreciation for your attendance. May what we learned during the discussion today expand our knowledge further. Thank you and see you at the next event.